There we go. Numbers climbing. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I think we're good. We're using a new platform today, so it's a little bit, I guess we're a little bit anxious. Will it work? Won't it work? Will everything go as it's supposed to? But
we're only slightly nervous. Just a little bit.
We've only had a small practice. Fantastic. Wonderful. Yeah. Okay. A few people in. Wonderful. We will start.
Cool.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone who is joining us this afternoon on a Tuesday. Some of you are probably the second week back at school, maybe the first week back. Yeah, term 4. Wow. Definitely one of the craziest terms we have in a school, isn't it? Report writing happens, end of year concerts happen, all kinds of crazy things. School camps, some schools have, so it's really intense. So thank you for taking the time out today to step in to this space and really have a conversation about what teacher wellbeing is and isn't. You will probably have heard me talk about teacher wellbeing in the past term or so, or 6 months, but this next 6-part series is all about discussing the truth behind teacher wellbeing, because I still think and see and notice with everything that's happening with teachers at the moment and teacher stress and workload and COVID still, the idea of what wellbeing is still not where it needs to be. And so that's what we're here to discuss and share. So
it's eluding, but it's eluding us still. So we've done some talking about this, Amy, about this whole notion of was our teacher wellbeing not sufficient or strong enough to be able to handle the challenges that 2020 has thrown at us? Has 2020 exposed some of those challenges that we've had, or the misconceptions that we've had around teacher wellbeing, and where are teachers at now in terms of wellbeing? Some of the questions that we've had. What do you reckon? Like, I'm fascinated by this topic of the truth about teacher wellbeing, because behind teacher wellbeing, because it kind of implies that there's some mistruths. Yeah. Why did you title this so?
Because I think there are definitely some mistruths. And I think what's happened this year is, I don't think we've ever gotten wellbeing wrong. I just don't think we've known how to do it sufficiently. We've just been doing what we know. We've been doing the best we can with the resources that we have. What's happened this year, though, is teacher wellbeing's been heightened even more. And so it's a more prominent topic that's being discussed. But knowing how to really tackle that so that it aligns with what teachers are experiencing and feeling is not what we're seeing. So I think definitely there's some truths to uncover and some things that are not true that we need to talk about.
There definitely isn't a collective agreement around what we mean by teacher wellbeing, I reckon. I think that even in my work and all of the principals and the APs I'm speaking to is, and showing my hand that I'm in Victoria where things are as tough as they can be, they all know that teacher wellbeing has been beaten up this year. And they're all in this murky space of trying to reinvent the wheel in their own schools about what they themselves are supposed to do about it. So I haven't seen a topic like it in Australian schools, where schools are kind of collectively collectively is the wrong word, sort of being left to themselves to try and solve this riddle around the wellbeing levels of their staff members. I haven't seen it happen like this before.
Yeah, definitely. We know it's a problem, but in terms of being able to access and do something about it, the resources are quite limited. If we compare it to student wellbeing, which has become such an enormous topic in the past couple of years, we know teacher wellbeing is there as well, but the support and the resources and what schools have access to is nowhere near as prominent as what they have for student wellbeing. And we know if we don't look after our teachers, they can't look after our students.
And sometimes the deployment of those resources for other people in the school is, what's wearing people out even more.
Yeah, definitely.
There's just so much to do, so many things to attend to, so many people to look after. We kind of have this mentality, don't we, as educators, of putting other people first.
That's what we do naturally. We're carers.
Yeah, we've bought that story, hey? Yeah.
And then there's that level of guilt attached to putting yourself first, which you know, is one of the things that we need to unpack and talk about, that we don't need to feel guilty for putting ourselves first at all.
Yeah. One of those things, isn't it? We've done really well at being able to make that language comfortable, but we haven't got to the point where we act on it really meaningfully, have we?
Yeah, and I think when
people keep running out of gas.
And we'll talk more about this individual and collective responsibility, but there's a notion of when you do something and you put yourself first, there can be an element of judgment attached to that by others. And why is that person leaving at 3:30? Or how come that person isn't at school and they should be? Or why do they get to do this and I don't? And so we're still not even collectively in agreement about what that looks like and supporting each other to do that.
Get in these habits around guilt and blame and self-guilt and self-blame as well that are just, you know, one of those things that sometimes they can even be true, they're just not helpful.
Yeah, they're not helpful. And it might be true to you, but it doesn't mean it's true to someone else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It's a whole
Go on.
thing. Let's keep
going.
Go on. All right. I'm hoping this works. Did that work?
Yeah. Slide change at my end anyway.
Gosh. I think I've spent more time working this out than it will take to run the whole webinar. That's like a really good lesson plan, isn't it? Where it takes longer to plan it than teach it. Same thing. Okay, so what's important to teacher wellbeing? I think we've all been exposed to the idea of teacher wellbeing enough to have established our own understanding or opinion of this. And before we go further and before I kind of share with you, I really would like to know, what do you think is important to teacher wellbeing in your school or in your classroom or for yourself or for your colleagues? So if you don't, I was going to say if you don't know how to use Zoom, but I feel like everyone does now, just pop it in the chat box for me and I'll be able to see there when you have discussions around teacher wellbeing, what's coming up for you? I've got to make sure I've got all the right boxes open.
I reckon one of the things, Amy, that I've been hearing people talk about is it's energy and enthusiasm.
Yeah.
You know, people talking a lot about, have they got the energy to get out of the embed and the enthusiasm to get through the day? You know, so I think that those keep bobbing up for me in the conversations that I'm having with a lot of school leaders in particular. They're noticing dwindling energy and enthusiasm levels amongst the staff members.
Yeah, and I think that's evident in not just in the classroom, but even just even doing admin tasks and daily tasks that are everything to do with teaching. So we're seeing it in the classroom and out of the classroom too, which makes it even hard. Support around doing your job efficiently and effectively. Yeah, absolutely. That's really important to teach well.
We hear that a lot. Actually, that makes a lot of sense. I hear that the well-being thing and the job thing we've seemed to have somehow drawn a line between them, where, we've forgotten that our well-being is often not determined, but highly influenced by how well we feel we're going in our work, by just our own sense of confidence and competence. And often the things we do about well-being have got nothing to do with our work.
Yeah, and it's interesting because well-being doesn't mean you're feeling good all the time. Yeah. Yet we feel like for our well-being to be in check or, 100%, I don't think your well-being is ever 100%. It's always up and down. It's always moving. But for that, we feel like we have to have everything together and we have to be successful. Yeah. And that it's not that. Yet we're sold that it's some kind of image of a perfect teacher. Then my well-being.
Yeah, that stock picture of a teacher smiling at the front of their classroom with nothing going wrong.
Yeah.
And classrooms should be places where they struggle, shouldn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You should have chaos in your classroom. A quiet classroom doesn't mean learning is happening. And it's the same thing. Just because a teacher's out the front smiling doesn't mean they've got it all together. Doesn't mean their well-being is okay. But we're sold these false images of what we have to look like or present like or act like to be seen as having our well-being together. And it's not. Yeah. Sometimes well-being is going, I'm a mess.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like
that's well-being.
Yeah. That was the worst lesson. Or I don't have it together today. I was going to teach this lesson, but I'm going to take it easy.
You hear that about, I reckon, successful staff rooms where a teacher can walk in and go, well, I supped this morning. and it's safe to be not perfect. It's safe to be flawed in your particularly in front of your colleagues.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Which again brings us back to it's about your work.
Yeah, it's about the World Health Organization has a great definition of well-being, and I don't know it off the top of my head, but there is a line in there which is about being able to contribute to others in society and do what you do effectively, essentially.
Yeah.
So well-being just isn't about you and how you feel. It's about your ability to impact, affect, and connect with others. And that is for teachers, teaching and doing your job as well. And that's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And there is an element of that collectiveness in teachers and being able to have conversations where we're going, I'm not okay, I didn't do this right, I could have been better at this, and all of that's part of it. You know, if you were to Google teacher wellbeing and try and find a definition, you can't do it. I've tried. You can't. There isn't one. But shaping one together as a collective of teachers is something that could be really powerful.
Yeah.
So we know what that is. So a couple of other things here around what's important is, identifying cognitive overload, feeling valued is really important. Collective responsibility, collective efficacy is really massive. Yeah, really important. That's interesting because we hear a lot about collective efficacy in terms of learning, teaching outcomes, but what will collective efficacy look like in terms of teacher wellbeing?
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for that, but I think that's something that could definitely be explored. Emotional empathy there, feedback on your job is important. Yeah. Being connected, autonomous, how confident do I feel in my work and my outside life? Wellbeing is fluid. Yeah, definitely. Trust, vulnerability. Oh, it sounds really soft. Sorry about that. I'll just turn mine up a bit. Just let me know how that goes, Janine, if it gets a bit louder. So there's a lot in teacher wellbeing, and I think when we see all those things, the contradicting part of it is we're not necessarily sold that wellbeing is about that. We kind of, when you Google teacher wellbeing and what does that look like or what can I do, we're met with this checklist of ideas or this self-care kind of approach, and that's not what wellbeing is. So how
this
do we...
wall of work, that we're not quite, so we don't know where to start. We can't establish starting points when it can mean so many different things.
And so we fall into this trap, and you probably have heard me talk about before, this idea of being reactive in terms of your approach to teacher wellbeing, or having a reactive response, or then an embedded approach to that in your school. And that's really where we've got to start looking at what does wellbeing look like for us as teachers, because at the moment we see, and I'm going to say a few things here, and there's nothing wrong with things like morning teas or hot chip Fridays or doing yoga. There's absolutely nothing wrong with any of those things, and they're very important and they're very valuable to staff and teachers or individuals, and they love them. But
because you're not let you bag hot chips, you do know that.
Yeah, hot chip Friday. Look, and I love a bit of yoga, don't get me wrong, but it is not the answer. And that's where I think we've got a big misconception around what wellbeing looks like for teachers. And we're falling into this trap of doing lots of reactive self-care things. And as I said, they're wonderful to do, but they're not helping to embed or change or build to a collective responsibility around what wellbeing looks like for us. And that's where we need to head.
That I find that confronting, because I then reflect upon my days as a principal, and I think that a lot of what I did in response to wellbeing challenges amongst was that kind of event-based self-care, nice thing to do kind of stuff, and hot chips and or a yoga session, and I find it hard, because I now am able to, and this is something you've taught me, Amy, is I'm now able to identify that the wellbeing levels of my staff I wasn't observing a problem there because of the absence of hot chips, or I wasn't observing a problem there because they hadn't done yoga lately. So it was me almost using habitualized or have routines and rituals that I've seen other people use when they have acted, when they've tried to act upon what they've observed as being a struggle, a low level of well-being. And it's confronting for me because I know that I only did any of those things out of love.
Yeah.
I know that I only did it because I cared. I just felt like I wasn't looking at the problem from the right angle. So I wasn't seeing the right solution.
Mm. And that's, if I go back to some of the comments like cognitive overload or feeling valued or having collective responsibility, if that's, to use your words for those of you who are listening, if that's what we're saying is what's important around teacher wellbeing, then that's what we need to address.
Yeah.
They're big things, right? They're big things to be able to have a look at what does overload look like, or overwhelm feel like, or stress look like for individual teachers, and how do we support them to manage that so that they can work effectively and efficiently, but also feel like they can stand up and say when they're feeling that way too, when they're feeling stressed or when they're feeling like they don't have it together. And instead what we tend to see, and you're right, Adam, it's done out of love and appreciation and wanting the best for teachers, is that we know, like report writing time, for example, is super stressful. So we know then that we're going to put on more tea for our staff because we want to help them
step up and do things like that. Yeah.
And how else can we look after them and help them? How else can we do that? And morning tea is a great way to do that. And it brings people together, and it's about connection, and it is important, but it's not at all, it's not leading to an embedded change. It's one of those band-aid things we tack on.
And I think that's why even on this slide, Amy, that I get a bit confronted by also. I'm just spending the whole day being confronted today. But I get confronted by the bottom part of this slide and this notion that I think we kept looking backwards and forwards at each other. We kept, staff would look at me saying, it's time for you to do something wellbeing. I'm looking back at them going, this needs to happen around your wellbeing. And never did we actually get across to that picture at the right column there at the bottom about us actually going, well, what are we doing together about this?
Mm. And we hear that, don't we? Like we hear things like, and there's a part of me that doesn't want to say it out loud, but we have to change it. We have to talk about it. We hear things like, my school leaders don't appreciate my wellbeing. My school leaders need to look after my wellbeing. My school doesn't value teacher wellbeing. And I don't think that's true at all. I think everyone wants their teachers to be working the best they can and feeling the best they can. But it's not anyone else's responsibility to look after your wellbeing except yours as an individual.
Yeah.
But as a collective, we have a responsibility to also have awareness of ourselves and everyone else when we come together to support each other.
Yeah.
And that's the bit we've got to balance. We've got to understand that we've got to do
starting to talk efficacy, doesn't it?
Mm.
That's, And
it's hard, right? It's a hard conversation to have.
It's hard because I keep looking back at all the mistakes I've made in this space, but I can live with it. I can walk on from it.
It's not in any way mistakes at all. Like, it's all got us to a point where we're like, we can do the next level now.
Yeah.
That's what it is. All right. So the teacher wellbeing journey, if we go back to this, I'm just going to flick back and forth for a sec. So if we go back to here, too far. Is there a delay?
There often is on slide changes.
If we look at the left-hand column here, especially around the morning teas and the yoga and the idea of what are you going to do about it, it all kind of sits in this aspect of doing something. And what that's shaped us to believe and what that's kind of made us think or realise is that the wellbeing journey is as simple as having a checklist and being able to tick things off. Like, I do my morning walk, I do some meditation, I practice gratitude, I drink herbal tea, I eat all my vegetables, I go to bed on time, I do some yoga. When we do all of those things, my wellbeing should be taken care of. And no is my answer to that, because that very simply is a checklist of self-care. And yes, that's super important, but it's not wellbeing, and it's not going to answer all our problems, because wellbeing is really messy. And what we want as teachers, and I guess this is by default of how we like to be organised, and we love checklists as teachers. We like to know we're on top of stuff. We like to feel successful. You know, there's nothing more, we don't feel more accomplished than when we tick off a list and hand our reports in, or have that final bit of planning done, and we know that we're free essentially. And so we're programmed to think that checklists are going to make us feel successful. And it's kind of the opposite in wellbeing, because there is no checklist at all that we can use. Like, there just isn't. Instead, we have to start to realize that wellbeing is going to be one, some, all, or a combination of these lines or maps here. And it's never just ticking off 10 things and I'm done and finished. So how do we do that as a school and a collective? That's what we're stuck trying to figure out now. How do we do that? How do we get a conversation with our teachers as a school to understand that collective responsibility is knowing everyone is on a different journey? And some days your wellbeing might be as simple as moving from A to B and you feel like you've achieved something and it was pretty easy. And then other days you're going to be going backwards and forwards and round and you feel like you've made success, and then you're going backwards and taking 2 steps forward and 10 steps back. And it's this big journey of understanding who you are as a person. And that's where we've got to make the shift from wellbeing being about self-care to being about who you are as a person and as an individual self, and then how do each of us individually impact the collective responsibility we have in our school for teacher wellbeing.
Yeah. So do you say, Amy, that like when you're sitting there talking about steps back, I'm having those moments where I'm going, well, wellbeing must thereby be connected to how expectant and how okay with those steps back schools are. Do schools do steps back? Do we see them as moments that we can go, well, there's a bit to learn from that, that's all right. Someone jumps in and gives me a little elbow and says, you know, you're all right, that's fine, no big deal. Or do we end up actually letting those steps back damage our own well-being? Because we were expecting them, or we see them as failure. We see them as, you know, I don't know, just disappointments that we shouldn't have had, or we should expect them, really, shouldn't we?
That's interesting, because I think that comes down to your mindset and how you view what success looks like.
Yeah.
And again, it's this linear thing where we want to tick stuff
linear.
off.
Yeah.
And I don't think any successful person would tell you, yeah, it was as easy as just ticking stuff off a list.
Yeah.
I don't think any person would say that, whether they're successful in business, whether they're an athlete, no matter what industry or field they're in, success is not that. And I think
it's going on all the time.
It's continually learning about who you are. And so you've got, in some ways, you've got to move back to move forward.
Yeah. It's
like when you're a beginning teacher and you're trialing things for the first time, but because in a way you don't know what you don't know, as a beginning teacher, you're prepared to take risks and you're prepared to try things, and you're prepared in a way to know that if it doesn't work, you can try something else or ask for help. And that's a great mindset to have for our beginning teachers, because without that, we wouldn't see them grow and flourish and succeed. But when it comes to ourselves in terms of our well-being, we don't necessarily, and I'm generalizing when I say we, but you know, we don't generally tend to apply that same mindset because it's hard and it's uncomfortable. And it's not as easy as ticking off, I've done my yoga and my meditation and gone for a walk and ate my salad. Like, it's not as easy as that.
We get seduced by the progress that I'm up to step 7 in my well-being. You know, whereas I know that there was a fabulous school principal that I worked with in the Northern Territory, and she said, I'm only just remembering this now, but she used to talk about tasting. She'd taste the sauce. So, you know, have you tasted the sauce? What do you reckon the sauce tastes like with the staff today? Because she said it's always just this art of, you know, it's tasting the sauce and seeing where everyone's at and making a difference. It's not so much am I up to step 7. It's actually look around, you know, taste what's going on and go, what do they miss? What does this recipe need a little bit more of or a little bit less of at the moment, and make that adjustment?
Yeah. It's about building a toolkit and being able to draw upon what you need. And that's what wellbeing is. So wellbeing is about broadening your awareness. of different options and possibilities and things to look at or focus on or understand or know. And that whole, when you go through that, it's a learning process about yourself. And it's not about ticking it off and getting from step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and I'm done. It's calibrating all the time. And
the more aware me, and with more of those tools that I can use as I need them.
Exactly. It's knowing what to draw upon when you get there. And so it's not going to be like this straight line the whole time. It's not. And so part of teacher wellbeing is understanding that the whole journey is about knowing that it's okay to spiral around and spiral up and spiral down. But it's what you have in the toolkit that wellbeing is about. It's about building a toolkit that we can draw upon when we're in the middle of this.
Yeah, you're not just reinventing the wheel. You've got some stuff that's here to, I can see this, I can taste this, I need to use this. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that leads on nicely to this idea of expanding your awareness and knowing what that means for you. And when I was thinking about this morning, and I was actually doing some positive psychology work, and they were talking about having more awareness of the positive things that are around you. And when we talk about teacher wellbeing, part of it is about having an awareness of what exists. And I think what happens when we go through anything uncomfortable, because often we think, again, wellbeing needs to be this pretty thing, like this, we talked about the teacher up the front in the beginning, or the nice self-care things that we do, which I think, Pinterest and Instagram and social media have really done some damage there in terms of what it looks like, because it's not all Insta-worthy. But our well-being sometimes happens in the messy moments. Like, it happens in the middle of the craziness. And when that happens, we have a tendency to close ourselves right up. Because we don't like we naturally want to protect ourselves. And we naturally want to, it's like that flight, fight or freeze thing. We naturally want to kind of get our armor on and know what do I need to do to protect myself? Where is this danger coming from? Maybe we just want to fold in on ourselves. And so what we have to learn to do, especially as teachers, because I don't think there's any day where it's smooth sailing, whether something happens in your classroom or whether you feel a little bit overwhelmed because you've got extra work to do, or, maybe it's report writing season or whatever. There's always something. There's never nothing. It's like, teachers could sleep at school and still never get through the to-do list. You couldn't.
Yeah.
There's always something to do. But what we have to do is expand our awareness on where we look to be able to see the positive things. And I don't just mean being grateful. That's a little bit different. I mean opening yourself up to opportunity and option and possibility. And this is a real mindset thing. So if you think of a sunflower has to follow the sun. And the sun essentially beams down all kinds of positiveness on a sunflower. But the sunflower has to work hard. It rotates itself to follow the sun, which means it wants what the sun is giving it, but it has to put in a little bit of effort. And sometimes your well-being is that. You've got to put in a bit of effort to find the positive thing or focus on it, because it's not naturally what you want to do. So we've got to move from always thinking the same way, perhaps closing ourselves off, perhaps only seeing a limited number of options and possibilities, to opening ourselves up to really know what's going on. And in terms of being a teacher in a classroom and for well-being, what does that look like? We can fall into a habit of, and I'll use report writing for an example, because I think that, it's probably report writing season for most people. When report writing season rolls around, we hear things like, oh my goodness, I've got so many reports to write, I don't have enough time, how am I going to get through all this? I can't believe I have this many to do, we need to have meeting-free weeks, I should be given more time. And we fall into this default of trying to want to look for blaming or finding a problem in that, or making it more difficult than it perhaps needs to be, when a few simple shifts in language and finding the positive in that.
So that's not a sunflower facing the sun, is that right?
That's not facing the sun. That is like looking for the storm. Looking for the storm. You've got to look for the sun, right? You've got to look for you know what, I've got 2 afternoons a week where I don't have meetings. I'm going to write 3 reports, you know, or look for, I'm going to work with a colleague to brainstorm some, like a word bank of ideas that we can use, and we're going to share them. This person will do maths, this person will do English, and then we can help each other out. And so you've got to look for opportunities and options rather than turn away and focus on what isn't working. And so to help you understand that a little bit more, this is about your state that you're in terms of well-being. So what we have to move from, when we talk about moving from self-care to well-being, well-being is about the state that you're in. And so when it comes to identifying, having awareness and understanding of your state, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for teachers to broaden their awareness of the state that they're in when they're going through all those crazy wishy-washy swirly lines and, you know, not feeling great or not feeling uncomfortable or wanting to change something and just not being able to get past it. And then saying sometimes to yourself, you know, what am I focusing on here? What am I doing? Am I closed off? Am I looking at fault? Am I looking at blame? Am I looking at obstacles? How could I open up to feedback, to possibility, to solutions, to be more open, to be collaborative? And when we start to shift from closing off to being more open, there's actually studies and research now that show that this dramatically impacts how you feel. This dramatically impacts how you connect with other people. It dramatically impacts your mood, your ability to be creative, your ability to be productive. And I think for teachers, if we're able to, this is where the collective is really important. If we're able to build a culture around teacher wellbeing where collectively we want to move people up to being that open sunflower, we will see a shift in the space of wellbeing, which is the embedded approach versus we have morning teas when our staff are stressed.
This is a really fine line, isn't it? You know, it's the real, and you talk about awareness a lot for school leaders, this real awareness piece, isn't it? Because I said before that a staff room should be a place where you can come in and go, oh, you know, I had a stinker, I had a really bad lesson, or I just messed that up, you know. But we can't let it be a place where we stay in the problem.
Yeah.
So it needs to be a place where we don't go to get cheerled in our misery. It needs to be a place where the normal thing to do in our staff is to get above that line.
And it's normal to know that sometimes you're going to be below the line and be like, that was awful. That's the human part in us. That's absolutely normal. And in actual fact, you can't see the possibility and the option or the opportunity without acknowledging that first. So it's an important part of the process. But we don't want to kind of build a team there.
Yeah, it's like a so what now what mentality. You know, we now that we so what now that we know what the problem is and we're aware of it and we've got that in place, which is kind of that distinction you make around state. It's not something that's happened. It's not event based. It's not something you do. But now, who are we?
Yeah. Which is the,
who are we? Well, we're open to feedback. You know, we're accountable to each other's well-being. We find possibilities and ways to get above and ways to get past this.
Yeah.
Which means that the thing that excites me when I actually do the whole put my principal hat back on is that doesn't need to happen in my presence. So I don't become some bottleneck on my staff's well-being by having to be responsible for it all the time. I've just worked on building a culture where the state is that we acknowledge problems and move above the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah,
that's, I think one of the things we've got to be careful of here is that we don't deny anyone's problem.
Yeah.
Everyone's problem is valid. Everyone's issue is real to them. Everyone has a different version of reality. So everyone's version of their problem exists. We can't...
Yeah.
What we don't, this is where the difference between empathy and sympathy comes in, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
spot on.
There's a problem, but I hear you, I see you. How do we move forward? Where do you want to go with this? What are some other solutions? As opposed to, yeah, that sucks, let's all whinge about it together.
Yeah.
Which we know teachers are really good at. So
I think people try to be more useful than that, but they still make it about themselves. So, you know, when a staff member comes in and says, oh, God, just, you know, I had a bad run-in with Jamie. You know, oh, well, look, what I do with Jamie is this, and he's fine. You know, so they're kind of trying to be generous, but that's not empathy. That's not seeing what it's like for this person. I think I've been guilty of that before.
Yeah, I think we all have.
I'm a fixer, but knowing that about myself and understanding what I first need to do is I try and understand what it's like for this other person, because without that, they're not going to see the possibility.
Yeah, and sometimes we need the other person to remind us that there's a possibility there, or an option, or a different choice. Yeah, you can get so stuck in your own story, or thinking I've tried 7 times and I feel defeated, and it's so easy to want to give up, or to look to blame someone, or to go, oh well, I've done all I can, so I can't do anything else now. And so you need to have that culture where you can have that conversation and have someone to go, oh well, hang on, what about blah? Yeah. So that's really important, and that's well-being in its essence. I think when we look at teaching well-being in a school,
those habits of conduct, isn't it? The habits of the way we treat each other in our work.
Yeah, it's who we are. It's not what we do. It's not the morning teas. It's not the yoga or the September challenge. It's not that.
So they're a handful of the little tools that I could have on my belt. But if it's not just me that has the tool belt, if other people have that, and they have an expansive array of kind of tailored tools for various situations, then we're able to help people see those possibilities for themselves.
Absolutely. And then when we have the idea of individuals moving through it themselves, we get this collective responsibility as well. You can't have collective without self.
Yeah.
You can't. So we've got to allow individuals to work through their own journey and through their own stories or their own problem or whatever it might be, so that we have collective.
Yeah. I'm doing the whole where do I start now in my head. What do I need to know to start to construct that culture?
Yeah, I'll jump a slide and then we might be able to talk about that.
Go on, yeah.
Where do you start is one of the hardest. Like, where do you start? I don't know where you start. But we do here within our Real Schools Academy have a teacher wellbeing partnership framework that we use in our teacher wellbeing partnerships. And this is solely built on the idea of self, so that you can use it in your school to move to a collective and embedded change. And I think when we say, where do we start, we're trying to look for something to fix. Like, where's the biggest problem? What can I do? How can I fix it? And sometimes
below the line.
Sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes it's about letting out. I think as leaders, and I don't know how many school leaders I'm hearing teachers, but I think with school leaders, when we're moving towards teacher wellbeing, our job isn't to fix as a leader. Our job is to provide people with the tools so that they can choose them when they need. And knowing that sometimes people won't know which tool to choose, and that's okay. And some people won't want to choose one because it's not the right time for them, and that's also okay. But we want to fix everything.
But your aim is, as a leader, is then to have this tribe of equipped people working in your school who just use what they need to use when they need to.
To use when they need it.
And what's that old expression about, when you see every problem as, when you're a hammer, you see every problem as a nail. So you're gonna operate the same way every single time. And it's about saying, no, let's give people more tools than just a hammer.
Yeah. And that's, like, I think about that when we talk, so you can see our 5 domains here: physical self, purposeful self, connected self, learning self, mindful self. Next week, we'll be talking about physical self. And that's so true, because we think physical self for well-being has to be yoga. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not that.
Great yoga.
Like, it's not. Everyone in the world doesn't have to do yoga. That is a truth we need
so pleased about that, because I know that I've been in staffs where the whole yoga thing has come up. Maybe we should do yoga together, and all I get is this horrible picture of myself in a full room that has a long mirror along the whole wall of the room in lycra, and I just don't need that. That's not good for my well-being. Yeah, I don't think anyone does it either. But
no, I think, like, you got staff bonding, and you got to think about those things, and But this is the thing, right? So we think that we think it ought to. It's like a one-size-fits-all model. It's not. It's not that at all. So when we look at physical self next week, and keep an eye out for that in our Sunday goodie bag if you want to join us, the link will be there. But we'll talk more about that, about how it's not a one-size-fits-all model. And for some people it's yoga, and for some people it's running, and for some people it's mountain biking, and all of that's okay. But again, physical self isn't just about doing stuff, which we'll talk about next time. But what we can see here is our job in schools now, or even if you're a teacher as an individual, is to learn or provide more awareness about self first. So what does your physical self involve, look like, and mean to you? What is purposeful self? What is that about? Your connected self, learning self, and mindful self. If you're sitting here right now and you're like, I don't know, that's totally okay, because over the next 5 weeks, we're going to unpack each of these for you a little bit more. And I'm going
a peek in the...
you don't need to know everything. But what we do in our Teacher Wellbeing Partnership is, over 12 months, unpack each of these, which means for like 52 weeks, you basically get 10 modules under each of these areas of self here that you can then utilize and use to build collective responsibility in your school around teacher wellbeing, and through all of that is self-care, because wellbeing is self-care.
They're the tools, so they don't need to. They actually don't need to come up with all the tools. They can go to Bunnings.
You don't need to.
You don't need to. Okay.
Yeah, we've done that for you, and we've done it in a way that means, because I think it's really important to know when we look at teacher wellbeing in terms of not being a one-size-fits-all model, is that you provide the tools, but you've got to also allow time for people to choose and select what they need. And so the way that this is done through email and video means you can let people do it privately, because some of the stuff, it's hard work sometimes when you're working on yourself and your well-being, and people might want to do that in their own space before they do it collectively. And so you can also use the partnership to bring into staff meetings, PLCs, have staff room conversations, whatever that might look like. So we want the absolute best for our teachers and our staff, but we've also got to acknowledge and understand that people are at different places, and that's part of wellbeing too.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So if you want to know
flexible approach is important, I guess, in terms of partnership and not just programs. It's not like week one, what video, talk about this, good, now we've got that done. So it's acknowledging and respecting that messiness, that I don't know, that bird's nest of a line that wellbeing really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that too is about culture of a safe space.
Yeah.
That's about setting that up. So when you talk about where do you start, I think we have to start with ourselves first, but then building that collective responsibility in a culture of your school, you then can move towards having a whole staff embedded approach where we are really able to make that about who we are and not something we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's nearly 4:30. We're nearly done. We're just going to finish off. So to help remember what teacher wellbeing is and isn't, there's a bit of there's a poster here that you can have. So if you would like to have access to this, just put a gift in the chat box there, and we will email one out to you. And it's an overview of what wellbeing is and isn't. It's a bit of a cheat sheet that you might like to pop up somewhere or have a conversation with staff. Yeah, absolutely, Heidi, you're very welcome. Because this is continual work. It's not something you can't read it once and throw it away. You've got to continually be working on it all the time. Fabulous, David, no problem at all. We'll get that to you. And I think sometimes a poster is a good reminder. You walk past it and you're like, oh yeah, that's right. That's what I need to be doing. So we've got this one coming your way. Absolutely, everyone. Thank you so much. And if you haven't already done so, if you haven't downloaded the copy of my white paper, Teach Wellbeing and Matter of Urgency, from our website, you can do that, or just put white paper in the box and I'll flick you one as well. That's super easy to take care of. And lastly, if you would like to have a chat about teacher wellbeing partnerships, rather than send you the big long Calendly link, there's a bit.ly here which you can use to book in a time in my calendar with me, and we can have a conversation about how we can bring teacher wellbeing partnerships to your school or for you as a teacher. And all of my contacts are there as well, or just flick me an email. But that pretty much brings us to the end today. So if you do have any questions, I'll hang around for a little bit. If there's anything you want to bring up, you can always email them to me. But thanks everyone for jumping on, and I hope that this has perhaps provided some new truths about teacher wellbeing.
Thanks, Amy. Appreciate it. I always like to dive into my past and examine the things that I've because I think we do tend to spot those things that we've done poorly, but I think also it allows me to see the things that I did well. And both my intention and my focus and my action, all of those things are things that I've done some good stuff in as well. So it's good to be able to move from being implicit about doing some of that stuff to being explicit, knowing that that doesn't always require more work as a school leader. It's about the culture of support and that efficacy that I'm building into my staff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not, it's kind of ironic, isn't it? We want it to be about making teaching easier, but we think it's going to be more work, which then makes it harder. I'd have
liked to have had a teacher wellbeing partnership. That would have been good.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. You're very welcome, Heidi. Thank you. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Tuesday afternoon, everyone. You're all dismissed. Go and enjoy it. And we will see you next week. Keep an eye out for that in our goodie bag newsletter on Sunday. The new link for next week around physical self will be coming your way. You're very welcome. Thank you. All right. I'm going to end this now. Bye.